A young woman steps in. She presses every button on the panel. She hides in the corner. She peeks out into the hallway like she's checking if something followed her in. And then she walks out, and the doors close behind her. That is the last confirmed footage of Elisa Lam, alive. 19 days later, her body was found in a place no one thought to look. A place guests had been showering and drinking from for weeks without knowing. This is the story of the Cecil Hotel, the girl who checked in and never checked out. This is one of the most haunting mysteries in true crime history. Before we dive in, if you're new here, this channel covers real, thoroughly researched true crime cases every week. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now, because you do not want to miss what's coming later in this video. And if this story grips you the way it grips me, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this case get seen by more people. Okay, let's go back to January 2013. Elisa Lam was 21 years old. She was a Canadian student, born in Vancouver, British Columbia, studying at the University of British Columbia. Friends and family described her as bright, creative, and a little bit of a wanderer at heart. The kind of person who kept an active online presence, blogging about books, music, and her day-to-day life under the handle Nini. She loved Tumblr. She loved photography. She was, by every account, an ordinary young woman, navigating the ordinary ups and downs of early adulthood. She also lived with bipolar disorder, for which she was under treatment. This detail matters, not because it explains everything that happened to her, but because it became a critical piece of the puzzle investigators would later assemble. In January 2013, Elisa set out on a solo trip down the west coast of the United States. Solo travel wasn't unusual for her. She'd expressed a desire for independence and adventure, and this trip was meant to take her through several cities, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Santa Cruz, before she returned home to Canada. She kept in touch with her parents regularly, checking in by phone and text as she moved from place to place. On January 26, 2013, Elisa checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Now, if you know anything about Los Angeles history, that name alone might make the hair on your arms stand up. The Cecil Hotel is not just any hotel. Built in 1927, it was once a glamorous stop for tourists and businessmen during LA's golden age. But by the mid-20th century, the surrounding Skid Row neighborhood had changed dramatically, and so had the hotel's reputation. Over the decades, the Cecil became linked to an unusual number of deaths, some suicides, some by natural causes, and disturbingly, some connected to two of the most infamous serial killers in American history, who had each stayed there during their respective killing sprees in the 1980s. By 2013, the Cecil had been rebranded in part as Stay on Main, offering budget accommodations that attracted a mix of long-term, low-income residents and young international backpackers looking for cheap beds in the heart of downtown LA. Elisa, traveling on a budget, was booked into a shared dormitory-style room. At first, everything seemed normal. Elisa was in contact with her parents throughout her stay, and there was nothing in her communications that raised alarm. She explored the city. She posted online. She was, as far as anyone could tell, simply a tourist enjoying her trip. Then, on January 31st, 2013, the communication stopped. Her parents, who had grown used to hearing from her regularly, didn't receive their expected check-in call. A day passed, then another. Concerned, they reached out to the hotel and eventually contacted the Los Angeles Police Department to report her missing. When hotel staff and investigators went to Elisa's room, they found her belongings, including her passport, her identification, and her medication, still there. Her disappearance made no sense. She hadn't checked out. She hadn't been seen leaving. It was as if she had simply vanished from inside the building itself. And that's when the search began, a search that would eventually lead investigators somewhere no one expected, and produce a piece of footage that would end up haunting the internet for years to come. Before we get into that footage, And trust me, it's going to send chills down your spine. I want to ask you for something. If you're finding this story as unsettling and fascinating as I do, take 2 seconds right now and hit subscribe. This channel is entirely built by viewers like you, sharing these videos. So if you know someone who's obsessed with unsolved mysteries, send this their way. All right, let's get into the investigation. With Elisa missing and her belongings untouched in her room, Lapta detectives launched a missing persons investigation. Skid Row, the neighborhood surrounding the Cecil, is one of the most heavily policed and closely monitored areas in Los Angeles. But even with that in mind, a 21-year-old tourist disappearing without a trace from inside a hotel was deeply unusual. Investigators canvassed the area. They interviewed hotel staff and guests. They checked hospitals, shelters, and holding facilities, in case Elisa had been in some kind of accident or had experienced a psychiatric episode in public. Nothing turned up. It was as though she had walked into the building and simply stopped existing. That's when detectives turned to the hotel's surveillance system and pulled the elevator camera footage from the night she vanished. What they found was unlike anything typically released in a missing persons case. The footage shows Elisa entering an elevator alone. She presses several floor buttons in quick succession. The elevator doors do not close. She steps out into the hallway, glances in different directions, gestures with her hands, and appears to be talking, though there's no audio. She ducks into the corner of the elevator car, seemingly trying to conceal herself from view. She peeks around the corner of the doorway repeatedly, as if checking whether someone, or something, is out there. At one point, she appears to step outside the elevator into the hallway, out of frame, for an extended period, before eventually returning. The behavior is erratic. It's disorienting to watch. And crucially, the elevator never closes on her, and no one else ever appears in frame. Lapt released this footage publicly on February 13, 2013, roughly 2 weeks after Elisa went missing, in the hopes that it would generate leads. Instead, it did something the department likely didn't fully anticipate. It went viral. Within days, the video had been viewed by millions of people around the world. True crime forums, amateur internet sleuths, and armchair detectives descended on the footage, freeze-framing every second, zooming into corners of the elevator, debating her body language frame by frame. Was she being pursued? Was she under the influence of something? Was she experiencing a mental health crisis? Theories multiplied by the hour, long before any of the real facts of the case were known. And then, on February 19, 2013, the case took its most disturbing turn yet. Guests staying at the hotel had begun complaining about the water. It was reportedly coming out of faucets discolored, with low pressure, and with an unusual and unpleasant taste. Maintenance staff went up to the hotel's rooftop to investigate the building's water tanks, large cisterns that supplied water directly to the rooms below. When a maintenance worker opened one of the tanks and looked inside, he found a body floating in the water. It was Elisa Lam. She had been inside that tank the entire time. Through the search, through the public release of the elevator footage, through weeks of guests unknowingly showering in and drinking water that had been in contact with her body. The tank was accessed by a hatch on the roof, and the water tanks were positioned in a way that made them extremely difficult to notice or access casually. They required climbing onto the roof itself and lifting a heavy lid. The discovery reignited public fascination with the case, now with a far darker edge. How did a 21-year-old woman end up inside a rooftop water tank? Was it possible for her to have gotten in there on her own? Did someone put her there? The internet had already built an entire mythology around the elevator footage, and now that mythology collided with a genuinely disturbing physical discovery. Detectives in the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office got to work trying to answer the central question of the entire case. How, exactly, did Elisa Lam end up in that tank? Investigators examined the rooftop access point. The hatch leading to the water tanks was heavy and required real physical effort to lift and hold open, and it was fitted with an alarm designed to alert hotel staff if the door leading to the roof was breached. An alarm that, according to reporting on the case, was found to be non-functional at the time investigators tested it, though there was no indication it had been deliberately disabled or that anyone had used the roof door with foul intent. There was no sign of forced entry, and no other individuals were seen in the elevator footage or in other hotel camera angles interacting with her. Investigators also looked closely into whether the water tank could realistically be accessed by one person alone, given how heavy and awkwardly positioned the hatch was, a detail that would go on to fuel enormous public debate. For weeks, the case captivated news outlets and true crime communities alike. Every new detail, the untouched hotel room, the disturbing elevator video, the horrifying discovery in the tank, added another layer to a mystery that seemed to defy simple explanation. But the answers investigators were looking for wouldn't come from surveillance footage or the physical scene alone. They would come from something far more clinical, the official autopsy and toxicology results. And those results would ultimately reshape the entire narrative of the case, even if they never fully satisfied the public's hunger for a clean answer. Coming up, what the coroner actually found, the official ruling on Elisa's death, the theories that refused to die more than a decade later, and why this case still shows up in your recommended feed today. Stick around, because the ending of this story is more complicated, and honestly more heartbreaking than most people realize. And hey, while your finger's already near the screen, go ahead and tap that like button. It really does make a difference for a channel like this. In the weeks following the discovery of Elisa's body, the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner coroner conducted a full autopsy and toxicology analysis. This was the step that could move the case beyond speculation and theory and toward something closer to fact. The toxicology report found a small amount of prescription medication in her system, medication consistent with the treatment of bipolar disorder, at levels that investigators and medical examiners determined were not consistent with an intentional overdose. Alcohol was not found to be a significant factor. There was no evidence in the autopsy of sexual assault, and no evidence of trauma consistent with a physical struggle, restraint, or attack by another person. The official cause of death was determined to be drowning. The manner of death was initially listed as undetermined, before eventually being classified by the coroner's office as consistent with an accident, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. In plain terms, the official investigation concluded that no other person was involved in Elisa's death. The working explanation offered by authorities was that Elisa, in the midst of what appeared to be a serious mental health crisis, made her way onto the roof, climbed onto the tank, and entered the water herself, and was unable to get back out. For many people following the case, this conclusion felt deeply unsatisfying. It didn't fully explain how a heavy rooftop hatch, one that reportedly required real effort to lift, could be opened and closed by someone in an altered mental state. It didn't fully explain how she climbed inside a tank that public reporting described as difficult to access, without leaving behind more obvious physical evidence of the process. And it didn't explain, to the satisfaction of online sleuths, why the alarm on the roof door was not working. It's important to be upfront here. The official conclusion, reached by trained investigators and medical examiners after a full review of the physical evidence, toxicology, and surveillance footage, is that this was a tragic accident connected to a mental health crisis, with no evidence of criminal involvement by another person. That is the finding on record. Everything beyond that point is public speculation, and it deserves to be labeled as exactly that. This is the theory most aligned with the official findings. Under this view, Elisa experienced an acute psychiatric episode, potentially related to her bipolar disorder and possibly influenced by stress, being alone in an unfamiliar city, or a lapse in medication routine. Her behavior in the elevator, under this theory, reflects genuine psychological distress rather than a reaction to an external threat. Advocates of this theory point out that psychiatric episodes can produce exactly the kind of disorientation, hiding behavior, and impaired risk assessment seen in the footage, and that people in acute crisis have, in rare documented cases, ended up in dangerous or unlikely locations because their perception of risk was severely altered. What makes the Elisa Lam case endure isn't just the strange footage or the eerie location. It's the collision between a real family's grief and the internet's appetite for mystery. Elisa was a real person, a daughter, a friend, a young woman with plans, and a personality, and a life that was cut short by what appears to have been a devastating mental health crisis, unfolding somewhere far from home and without anyone around who recognized what was happening in time to help. In the years since, the case has been the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and countless online video essays. The Cecil Hotel itself eventually underwent renovations and a rebrand, partly in an effort to move past its association with tragedy. But the elevator footage remains one of the most viewed and discussed pieces of surveillance video in true crime history. Elisa Lam's story isn't a ghost story. It's the story of a young woman who needed help in a moment of crisis, in an unfamiliar city, far from the people who loved her, and didn't get it in time. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the Elisa Lam case. If you learned something from this video, or if this story affected you the way it's affected so many people over the years, do 3 quick things for us before you go. First, hit that like button. It genuinely helps push cases like this in front of more viewers, and it tells us you want more deep dives like this one. Second, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we release new, thoroughly researched true crime cases every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. And third, drop a comment below and let us know what part of this case stood out to you most. Was it the footage, the water tank discovery, the official conclusion? We read every comment, and some of the best video ideas on this channel have come directly from viewers like you. If this case pulled you in, we've got a full library of other in-depth true crime investigations on this channel. Cases just as strange, just as tragic, and just as thoroughly researched as this one. Go check out our other videos, linked on screen and in the description below. And if you want to make sure you never miss a new case when it drops, subscribe now and stay close, because there's a lot more still to uncover, and we'd love to have you along for the next one. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next video.